Hello and good afternoon, everyone. A very enthusiastic welcome to all of you to the third of IU's lunch talks. Before we go on, I'm Jo Puri. I have been head of evaluation unit, and we're for all of those who are new. The IU lunch talks is a series of monthly talks that we do to bring in experts from around the world to talk on subjects that are relevant to the GCF. A lot of our speakers concentrate on areas that are related to mitigation, adaptation, and forestry. A lot of them speak about subjects that are relevant to evaluation, but in many cases not so as well. I think the common thread that goes through them is that this is good evidence-based thinking, and that is state-of-the-art thinking in this area that we want to try and promote a dialogue around within the GCS, and also use it as an opportunity to create a community which is local and then increasingly international, that we can leverage not just for our own work, but also to create a dialogue in this space. So I'm really pleased to have Professor Semee Yoon with us today. Semee is an associate professor at Yonsei University, and particularly at the Sustainable Development and Cooperation Office at Underwood International College, and also holds a position at the Graduate School of International Studies at Yonsei University. Semee's work actually transcends environment and development. And so she's done work in climate change adaptation in developing countries, especially that related to energy, and is currently working on a microeconomic analysis of Vietnamese households. She's also worked on gender equality in Sierra Leone and primary education and resilience in the context of Tanzanian coffee farmers. She's got her bachelor's and PhD degrees from Columbia University, and so today Semee is going to be talking about solar energy projects and products, and basically a really rigorous impact evaluation that they are running and have run in India. With the overarching question being, are they commercially viable? And so how they've investigated different price points to then understand as to what could be commercially viable. This talk is available currently on Blue Jeans, so for people to log in, but it's also being recorded for others who might want to refer to it later, and can just send a note to JD. So without much further ado, Semee, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for coming. Since I've been told that it's a brown bag series, I'm going to keep it casual, so feel free to munch on your lunch and ask me questions along the presentation. So we're going to forget your comments. So,
but otherwise, the format is that Semee will speak for about 25 minutes, and then we'll open it up for more discussion type questions, but definitely clarificatory questions meanwhile.
So thank you for coming to hear about the demand for solar energy products among the poor. Evidence from India. This is a couple of my precious baby projects from my PhD dissertation. It took about 2-3 years just to run the program and evaluate it, and we are in the process of developing and elaborating upon the evidence that we found based on these projects, which I will cover a little bit in the conclusion as well. So first, the motivation. I was going to say that we are staying in a warm and electrified room, but it seems that it's the cold and electrified room that we're staying. But I hope that today's short talk on how the poor and developing countries lack even the basic household electricity access provides you something to think about as you leave this room, and think about how we have access to seemingly unlimited source of electricity because we can turn on or off or switch whenever we want to use it. In comparison to that, about 61% of the poor living in Asian countries lack basic household electricity access. So whenever I tell my tech-savvy students about that fact, they're so surprised because they can't imagine a city or or a town that doesn't have access to electricity because the young generation in Korea, they've been living with electricity their entire life. So providing affordable energy services to the poor in developing countries is one of the pressing challenges in sustainable development because there has been numerous evidence about how providing electricity access enhances the microeconomic livelihoods of the poor. So imagine that you are a policymaker in a developing country, and let's say that you somehow got this funding to provide electricity to the poor. How would you think about delivering electricity to the poor?
Provided with
subsidies, but if you are a policymaker that wants to win elections next time around, what might you consider to be the most important aspect about trying to expand your infrastructure or
expand the grid?
And so if the policymaker goes to the engineer to ask how should we providing electricity, he will say the most cost-effective option will be to provide it to flat and populated areas first, because you can reach the highest proportion of the population and make sure that they've had the experience of using electricity. Okay. And so because the policymakers have the tendency to gravitate toward certain strategy when providing electricity, it's much more difficult to analyze the impact of electricity provision on households, because even though the poor living in mountainous areas are not choosing to live in mountainous areas knowing that they would not receive an infrastructure first, the policymakers endogenously have this tendency to gravitate to flat and populated areas. So when trying to understand the impact of infrastructure provision on people's livelihoods, it's much more difficult to precisely estimate how our enhancement of infrastructure is actually influencing the development status of the households. But overcoming that, some of the scholars have found that if we increase access of electricity at the household level, that increases livelihoods at different dimensions. For example, children can have broader access to electricity because if they're not using kerosene lamps but are using electricity from lighting on their roofs, then they can make use of the lighting in a greater dimension. And another example is that sometimes if you are able to provide electricity to a considerable amount of wattage, then females can utilize household appliances if they're able to purchase it, and that frees up time from their household home production, and they can provide part-time work labor hours to the local labor market. So there are these different but limited understanding of how electricity provision enhances microeconomic development. And because there are certain areas that are costly to provide grid electricity, some practitioners have been advocating that we should be providing energy through off-grid options. And through off-grid technology, what we can do is that we can provide, if you're using solar energy or any kind of renewable energy source, that we can reach rural communities that have no access to the grid electricity, and also provide electricity from clean energy source. So we'll be hitting two birds with one stone. So understanding that there are geographic and economic and political regions sometimes that prevent grid electricity provision, some practitioners, policymakers, and even the private investors have been looking upon the feasibility of off-grid solar energy as an option to provide electricity in the solar market. But even though there is the potential, considering the technical perspective, people have been advocating for understanding the demand for solar energy products, because we have been seeing that if the poor are just provided with the new technology option, it's not that they're they're not going to automatically take it up because we expect them to take it up. So in the literature, there's surprising little hard evidence about how we should be demonstrating or marketing solar energy to the poor, and there's lack of evidence on what could be the options or what could be the barriers that are present in the solar energy market that prevents us from expanding the adoption of solar energy in the rural communities. So understanding that if we have better evidence, given a fixed amount of budget available, we could maximize our potential by identifying which strategies work best in rural communities and consider their context, so that since we have this budget available for expanding solar energy market in the poor rural communities, we could provide them with better evidence, with hard evidence about how we should be progressing in the near future, so that we can expand the donors' incentive, or if we can further advocate for increased incentives in the solar energy market. So instead of asking, does solar energy market work, or should we be providing aid for it, we should be asking the question of what strategies work best in each context, and if it works best at a local scale, could we be scaling it up at a regional scale or at a national scale or even international scale. So based on this motivation for evidence on solar energy market, we started to do literature review of existing evidence on how the poor respond to a new technology. There's a lot of evidence actually on looking at how the poor respond to agricultural technologies for a really long time. They've realized that if you introduce something called learning by doing, so if you give them time and experienced workers to work with novice workers, then that actually provides them with opportunities to learn what kind of technologies work best for increasing their agricultural productivity. And they've also seen that if you try to reduce informational barriers by letting them know what kind of fertilizers are available and give them time to demonstrate it with their community members. So if they are in a communal environment, that actually helps, instead of just having them apply the new technology one by one. So knowing that there are these kind of tendencies, we want to see if the same kind of option or same kind of strategies may be applicable for the solar energy market as well. And another thing that the poor might be worried about is that even if they purchase this new products, will they be able to get maintenance or any kind of after sales service? Because oftentimes what we observe when we go to developing countries, including India or Cambodia, Vietnam, even if they purchase a solar product, they will say that if they will call the marketer about a malfunctioning product, and then nobody picks up. So because this kind of experience accumulates, even if they're presented with a new technology that could potentially help to enhance their livelihoods, they may be hesitant towards this new technology option because of their past experience. So we want to see if this kind of concern also is prevalent, or whether it's present among the Indian households as well. And then another thing about the demand for solar home systems or solar products could be that they just don't know about it. Even though we've been talking about solar energy products for a while, it could be that the poor communities in developing countries lack access to the market, the solar energy market, so that even if they heard about it, they wouldn't know where to go about it and then purchase it and then maintain it for a certain time. So we wanted to know the basic awareness about solar energy products, whether they know about it, and if they came to know about it, how much they would value purchasing it. And so we first looked at the evidence for two solar energy products. One about the willingness to pay for solar lanterns, which I'll show a picture of later, and then also the patterns for demand for solar home systems among the rural communities in India. So the research setting, interestingly enough, similar to other developing countries, India presented or established a rural electrification program indicating that their goal is to provide electricity to the poorest of the poor among all of the Indian population in 2005. And the province that I was working in India is a northern province called Uttar Pradesh, and it's actually according to the census of 2011, it's the second poorest province in India. And so the data suggests that about 43% of the rural households in Uttar Pradesh depend on kerosene for lighting. And in areas, in villages where they do get grid electricity, they only get it for about 4 to 8 hours a day. So it would depend on how much power they're able to provide to the house at the household level. And of the Unnao district, which was the district that we worked within the province of Uttar Pradesh, 59% of the villages were electrified. So looking at the evidence for solar products in this province would give us the estimate for how big of a willingness to pay they have for solar products among the poor rural communities in India. So if you look at the solar potential of India, there is actually an ample potential, and that's why even the government established something called Jawaharlal Nehru National Solar Mission. And what this does is if the household is willing to purchase a solar home system, they provide subsidy up to 30%. And their goal is to provide 20 million solar home systems, but they haven't even neared 1 million yet. And so what we wanted to do was first see the willingness to pay for a solar lantern. That's on the left. It's a typical lantern that we would show to the household. And the picture on the right shows a solar home system, a typical solar home system we would advertise to the poor rural households in Uttar Pradesh. And so knowing that there's a big potential on the technical side, we want to understand whether people would actually demand these products if they are presented with the opportunity to take these up. So specifically for solar lanterns, we wanted to see if they were given a week to test it out for themselves without paying for it. Would this kind of trial period actually increase their willingness to pay for solar lanterns? And then we also wanted to see if we give them a postponed payment period, meaning that even if they do want to purchase it, they may not have the money available at the moment. So we would also give them a week to come up with the extra money to purchase the solar lantern if they wanted to. So we wanted to see if the trial period or the postponed payment scheme would increase the willingness to pay of solar lanterns. And then in terms of solar home systems, because we were working with a local enterprise that was selling the solar products, we wanted to give them an estimate of how big is the demand for solar products among the rural poor, because from the business perspective, you can't run that kind of evaluation from your own pocket money. So from additional funding source from the university, what we tried to do was we wanted to know whether they know what a solar home system is, whether they've seen it, or do they know a neighbor with a solar home system. And we wanted to know if we tell them about the benefits of a solar home system, whether that has an impact on how much they think this should be valued at and what should be the market price for it. So the basic methodology for lanterns is we actually played a little game with them. So we reached out to the poorest of the poor. So we went to the most remote villages and then recruited about 1,008 villagers at random, and then they would pick from one of the three envelopes that was either a control group or a group for a trial period, and a group for postponed payment period, and then we would have a box of balls with a specific price on it, ranging from $0 to $8. And that would be about 0 rupees to 480 rupees, and it was at increments of 60 rupees. And so we explained to them, how much would you be willing to pay for the solar lantern? And if you pick a ball out from the box and the price of the ball, if it's lower than their willingness to pay for it, then they could purchase it. But if you pick a ball and the price of the ball is greater than their willingness to pay for the solar lantern, then because their willingness to pay is lower than the price on the ball, they would not be able to purchase it. So we made sure that they understood this concept, and we played this for a while with them until they understood it. And then we would ask them, for the final time, are you sure this is your willingness to pay for the solar lantern? And they would say yes, and then we would end the game and then compare their willingness to pay and the price actually on the ball. And so this was how we tried to get the willingness to pay for the lanterns. And this is a simple equation just to evaluate whether the trial period has an influence on the willingness to pay for it, and whether the delayed payment has an impact on the willingness to pay. And then we also had covariance about their household expenditure, how big is the household size, etc., to control for household characteristics and its relationship on the willingness to pay. But in terms of solar home systems, because it's more promising from the business perspective to reach to as many people as possible, we actually did the baseline survey in large villages, and we would hold a demonstration at the center of the village to advertise how solar home system works, and then we would randomly pick 10 households per village to have a baseline survey about their understanding of solar home system. And so it included not only questions about solar home system, but about their socioeconomic status as well, and their views about policies and solar technology subsidies. So basically, it's a similar structure where we have the about their answers from their perception and awareness about the solar energy product on the left-hand side, and their household characteristics and all their socioeconomic status information on the right-hand side. So just to briefly summarize what we found about the solar lantern is that there is a significant difference in their willingness to pay if you provide them with delayed payment scheme compared to the control group. But if we look at the relationship of the trial period itself, it didn't have a significant impact across all treatment groups. So even though we thought, because in the literature, there are scholars that suggest that providing them with some time and experience with this new technology might relieve them of their concerns and uncertainties about the new technology. For solar lanterns itself, maybe it was straightforward that the technology wasn't as complicated compared to solar home systems, for example. We don't know why, but the trial period for solar lanterns at least indicated that it's not as significant in increasing the willingness to pay. And we also tried to look at different income groups. So we looked at the poorest 25% households and the median groups and the top 25% households, and we ran that kind of quantile regressions. But nevertheless, we found that the trial period nor the postponed payments did not have a significant positive influence on increasing the willingness to pay. At the end of the game, there were 110 households that did end up purchasing solar lanterns, and qualitatively, when asked, why did you purchase a solar lantern, the households responded that they thought purchasing it for this one time would actually decrease their expenditure on electricity or some source of lighting for a while. But this kind of evidence is just a qualitative evidence, and we cannot say it's a causal relationship. But in the case of solar home systems, we found more promising aspects. So when we just, without showing them the actual solar home systems in the first place, when asked, do you know what a solar home system is? 64% of them said yes. And then we showed them the actual thing, and then 89% of them said they've seen it. So even though they've seen solar home system installed in other households, they were passing it by without knowing that it's a solar home system. And about 75% of them also said that they knew a neighbor or some kind of relative with a solar home system. And the predictors of awareness of solar home system were higher households with higher expenditures and to know what a solar home system is. And also, if the household had more years of education and if they tended to be younger, they tended to know what a solar home system is. And then we also asked them what should be the price for the solar home system. And the average price that we obtained from the households was about $120. And since the market price is about $208, it's still lower than the actual market price. But if we think about, and even if we consider the subsidy amounts, it's lower because the government is willing to provide about 30 to 40% of the subsidy. And then if we also ask them, how much are you willing to pay for a solar home system? We find that the willingness to pay is lower than how much they value it. So the average amount was about $67. So even though subconsciously they value it at a higher price, when asked how much they're actually willing to pay for it, it's at a lower price. So we found that this was interesting in the aspect that they do attribute some kind of value to the solar home system, but maybe based on their household budget constraints or some kind of issue, they think the actual willingness to pay for it is lower than the value they think should be allocated for the solar home system at the market. So the predictors of the willingness to pay for solar home systems included whether they have used grid electricity before. So we also thought that this was interesting. So if they have some kind of experience of using electricity before, that also tended to increase the willingness to pay for a solar home system. And then if they have a higher income, they tended to also have a higher willingness to pay for the solar home system. And also if they had a higher kerosene expenditure per month, that also contributed to higher willingness to pay and the higher levels of education as well. So going forward, this helped us to narrow down what kind of products the solar enterprise should be focusing on. Because the demand for solar lantern is so low, the mean willingness to pay for it was only about 40 rupees when the market price is 480 rupees. So we thought this should not be the primary product that the enterprise should focus on. But when we actually went around and demonstrated the solar home system, we saw that even a bigger wattage system was popular compared to a smaller one. So the picture that I showed was a 40-watt system, but instead the consumers wanted to pay for a long period and rather purchase a bigger wattage system of 100 watts. So we also found that kind of a providing bigger wattage system may be more applicable if you're able to combine it with a local bank to have installment schemes. So how we were advertising this was we connected it to the national subsidy program that was available, and we told them they could finance it through a local bank. So the 100-watt this system was more popular. And the interesting fact that I already mentioned about the complementarity between having experienced electricity before and how that has an influence on their willingness to pay for solar system was something to check upon for other developing countries' context as well. And so knowing that there is this high willingness or high interest for solar products, the ongoing projects that we have right now is to provide it at a bigger scale, at a picogrid scale, because many of the Indian communities, they have a communal relationship. So if instead of just purchasing solar home systems by household, if they had an opportunity to use electricity at the village level through a picogrid, could that enhance their ability to use electricity from solar energy source? So that's another interest that we have, my colleagues and I. So we are trying to combine the picogrid and the dynamic pricing scheme to see if the households respond to a lower price during the day and a higher price during the night where you can't generate solar energy. So this is an ongoing project that we're trying to evaluate now. And one of the basic or one of the interesting aspects that I realized from running these projects is how important it is to combine research questions with actual stakeholders in the solar energy market. So it gave me a lot of things to ponder about, because I was actually partnering up with the local solar enterprise that really wanted to measure the social impact they were having, but did not have the capacity to do monitoring and evaluation. So I was really lucky to have an entrepreneur like that to come up to us first and ask us to do this kind of evaluation. But we're not the only group that does this. There is an increasing interest in trying to measure the social impact or trying to understand the demand side of things when we try to expand renewable energy like this. So I hope this gives you some room for thought as we try to increase sustainable energy access in developing countries. So feel free to ask me questions.
Thanks, Semee. So I'm going to use moderator's privilege and perhaps get started off on some Q&A. The first was, I thought it was quite interesting that quite contrary to popular belief that solar home systems and solar lanterns can be used as a gap-filling measure for off-grid areas, what you're finding is that actually these tend to be far more popular and accepted in areas where there is already quite a bit of experience with on-grid electricity, and where they're using it much more as a substitution measure for grid electricity rather than as a gap-filling measure. And I was wondering whether one of the policy conclusions that you would reach from there is that solar systems as well as solar lanterns should probably be more targeted to middle-income households that are already connected to the grid rather than be used as a way to get electricity and energy to lower-income households. And the second part of that question was whether you saw any peer effects. A lot of households tend to change their own energy consumption and behavior patterns depending on how their peers are behaving. And I was wondering, I saw that there was an income effect and there was an education effect, etc., but whether there was also a peer effect. So that, and if you could clarify also what you meant by dynamic pricing. Thanks.
Questions around the room, please. And I'm happy to bring the mic. Yeah, John.
I'm John. I'm quite interested in seeing if those households have any awareness of climate change. For example, if they want to spend at least some amount of money on the solar lanterns, if they can find some more fossil fuel-based source of lighting that's cheaper than the solar lantern, would they invest in that technology rather than solar? So I want to see if there is a correlation between awareness of their climate change and their investment into their electricity investment.
Thank you. One more before we get her to at least answer the first round of questions. Yeah, Joseph.
So thank you. I just wanted to check whether if this has been done in a different village or location, a different continent, the results will be different. How might does the local content influence the type of results?
Semee, do you want to take those, and then we'll go around for the next round.
So about the low income versus middle income households, one of the predictors was whether they have experience of using electricity before. So it's not necessarily about are they using grid electricity all the time, but the fact that having experienced it increases the willingness to pay. I think it does show a potential for solar energy to be an option for the middle income households. But one of the interesting aspects coming out from this body of literature is that there is even high interest among low income households as well. So recently what the government of India did was they revised its renewable energy policy last year, indicating that there are certain remote villages that are too costly to connect by grid electricity. So they have advocated that if there are local enterprises or international businesses that are willing to sell their solar energy products in these remote villages, they will provide subsidies for it. And so they have a list of about 200,000 villages that they've identified that are too costly to connect by the grid, but and would rather work better if off-grid options were available. So, and these poor households tend to be living in these remote villages, so we should not be overlooking the low-income households. But I do understand your not concern, but your interest in how the middle-income households could also benefit or will be interested in the solar energy option. And about peer effects, so we do have response about whether they've seen neighbors with a solar home system. So I think it would be interesting to look at that with the willingness to pay. So I'll look at that relationship to see if there is a peer effect happening. So if people tend to have these kind of neighbors, are their willingness to pay higher? So I'll check into that to see. And about the dynamic pricing scheme that we are running right now, so what we're trying to do is each household is connected to a microgrid, and at random times they will be flashed with lights, with a green light if it's a low pricing week or low pricing day, and then medium price with the orange light, and the high price with a red light to indicate that prices are changing when they're using electricity. And we're trying to see if they reduce their electricity use during high prices and then use more of it during low prices. And we were interested to see this because the battery technology for solar energy are improving, but we are still seeing that there is a discrepancy. So we wanted to see if consumers could be nudged into using more energy when there's much more sunlight during the day compared to when we would not be able to generate electricity from solar power during the night. So that's our rationale for running the dynamic pricing experiment. In terms about the perception about climate change, so there was a variation from our qualitative diary that we kept. There were some farmers that knew about climate change, but they were not directly making the connection with the solar energy. But what they were more concerned about was how, if they were using solar lantern or solar home system, they could potentially reduce their spending on kerosene. So even though it's a one-time purchase, they realized that this could actually relieve the burden on their household budget. So I think that was more of an interesting component for them than the whole climate change adoption frame of introducing this product. And about the local specific content of this findings, so what we're trying to do is we're trying to introduce this kind of framework in Myanmar for now. The enterprise, because there is a global network of local solar enterprises around the world held, operated by the UN, the entrepreneur came to know of other entrepreneurs working in Cambodia and Laos, etc. So he's partnering up with other entrepreneurs in Myanmar, Laos, and I think also Tanzania. So he's in the process of getting more grants for this. So we haven't been able to run similar analysis in other contexts, but we're hoping that we would be able to do that in the long run.
Next round of questions, anyone? Okay, well, Semee, you and I can have a chat soon after, but thank you. With that, we come to the end of our lunch session, and thank you very much, everyone. Before you close, just to announce that we, Joseph and I will be doing a lunch talk at the end of November 24th, on looking at climate information services and what are we finding in terms of evidence. So it'll be a joint IU DMA talk. So you're most welcome to that. We'll put out information soon. Thank you everyone for coming, and we look forward to being in touch. And let us know if there are speakers and other people that you'd like to see featured at the IU talks. We'd be very happy. Thanks, Semee.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Good hearing.